what is it that inspired you to create Stackr here?
Definitely trying to build more Web2 developers into Web3 is one thing, but we kind of thought that the way applications are built right now is something that has been stuck for like a very long time. We want to change that so that people build more efficient applications. People should be like on a lookout for like a beta phase drop. So hopefully by the end of this month, we'll be starting out with a beta release.
Nice, dropping some alpha here. That's always good. Hey there, and welcome to another episode of the TEACHMEDEFI podcast. Today we got Kautuk Kundan on the show, a former developer and R&D engineer at the Ethereum Foundation and founder of the project Stackr. Thank you for coming on the show, man.
Thank you so much for having me.
Lovely. Yeah, no, really excited to dive into the topics we got lined up today. We'll be chatting more about rollups and things like that. I'm sure you have a lot to say about that. Actually, we're just recording this right after ETH Denver right now. Were you there or?
Oh yeah, so this time the team decided that it would be better if we just stay at our place and build, because we are aiming
Yeah,
for like a release very soon. And
yeah.
conferences are really good, but it takes away some time where you can build. Although like just watching everyone post on Twitter created like a lot of FOMO, and we just like regretted not going.
All right, cool. So it's basically heads down building moment right now for you guys.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's been that's the time for it. Clearly, I mean, you're I think at the beginning ish. I'm curious to hear where you're at in your roadmap in a sec. But let's just chat about Stackr. I mean, I went on your website. It says in as a headline, sort of micro-rollups to scale Web3 applications. Obviously, I think there hasn't been one headline on a crypto project where I was like left somewhat confused. You know, there's always buzzwords in it, and I think for a lot of people it can be a bit difficult to unpack. So I'm just wondering. One of the things that maybe to kick it off with is what are actually rollups, and perhaps what are micro rollups then? What are you guys doing, so to say?
Yeah, no, of course. So rollups are basically like execution environments that are lifted from the main chain. So it kind of helps reduce congestion and like reduce the load of the parent chain and move the execution part away from it. So you're doing most of the transactions off chain, and then it creates an aggregate proof or some sort of combination of things, which then goes back to the parent chain, and you can share the security from it, and you can actually prove whatever happened on that execution layer. So that's like the very high level overview of rollups. Then I'll come to micro rollups. So up until now, the current, like the most popular rollups have been like EVM based rollups. So the definition of rollups doesn't like limit you that okay, this is a particular VM that should be used as a rollup. So it's like an execution environment. It could be anything. It could be a Ethereum virtual machine. It could be Solana virtual machine. It could be Move virtual machine. It could be any kind of virtual machine, or it could be a combination of those things. So what we decided to take a step back from it and think about execution from like the root level. So we decided that okay, if we can build an execution environment which is hyper optimized to your use case, then we should be able to get even more performance benefits out of it. So we are building a framework wherein the user, instead of like having a VM, like a pre-built VM or a existing framework of a VM, and then deploying smart contracts on top of it, they get to write their business logic as the rollup framework itself, like inside the rollup framework itself. So they take away the entire business logic, they put it inside a state transition function, and that state transition function becomes the rollup. So instead of having an EVM and then deploying your business logic as a smart contract on top of that EVM, you directly write your business logic inside the state transition function. Hence the name micro, because it's like extremely small, extremely compact, and very optimized for the use case.
Okay. Let's try and unpack that. So, in terms of well, you clearly said, okay, we're doing rollups. If you had the apps on Ethereum mainnet, you obviously have like high transaction costs and things like that. So, I suppose for scaling purposes, this has been sort of like or one trend has been to outsource that on these other layer twos, these rollups, and that's more scalable. but so Stackr is trying to kind of go in terms of direction towards deploying rollups. Is it so? Do you mean by not doing it like on an EVM or things like that, that you won't be, for example, like what tech stack would you be using? Because it's been also a trend in terms of like Polygon CDK or OP stack, all these like frameworks, I guess, to develop these rollups. How does Stackr fit into that whole thing?
Yeah. So we are also providing a new framework to build these applications, and the thing that we are going towards is giving more of a Web 2 like developer experience. So like the largest amount of developers in the world are like web developers, so they build web applications, and like by that, like JavaScript developers are the most like the biggest community of developers out there. So we decided that okay, to reach out to like a larger audience so that more people start developing Web3 applications, we should create something that these people are familiar with and all are able to build applications in this structure. So our framework primarily targets JavaScript developers as of now. We also plan to expand it to other languages also, and eventually provide a way so that all the crypto specific stuff is abstracted away from them, and they only focus on like building applications similar to how they build like regular Web2 backend applications. So this way we believe that this will help them slowly transition into Web3. They still build very secure applications without worrying about what goes underneath, how the chain works, how everything is structured. And this gives them like a very quick way of like coming up with ideas and building applications. So just to summarize, like we are creating a new framework, and this framework allows them to build applications in a Web2 native way.
Okay. So is that then in contrast to other frameworks like using the Polygon CDK or the OP stack and things like that?
Yes. So Polygon CDK and OP Stack both are like EVM based frameworks. So they give you a VM, which is like the Ethereum virtual machine, and then you modify that Ethereum virtual machine to your needs. We go like even one step below. So we give you like a raw we give you like the basic materials to build a VM, and then it is expected from the developers to write their own state transition functions. So in case of the projects which you mentioned, the state transition function is the Ethereum virtual machine itself, and then people add like precompiles, modify it, change some cryptography inside of it. But for us, they build it from like the approach is like bottom to top instead of top to bottom. So this is probably like the biggest differentiating factor between CDK, OP Stack, and other frameworks versus us.
Okay. So I guess you have been seeing a lot of rollups using these tech stacks and frameworks, right? I think another one would be Polkadot SDK or Substrate. So what is it that inspired you to create Stackr here? Like what gap is there in the Ethereum for example, in the Ethereum ecosystem that you aim to fill? Is it mainly this thing in terms of we want to reach developers beyond crypto, like from the traditional Web 2 and bring them into crypto? Or is there more to it? Yeah, just tell me more about that.
Yeah, no. So Polkadot is something which the entire team loves. Like many of the things that we are doing here is somewhat directly or indirectly inspired by Polkadot. So we do something, and it's like, okay, this is similar to Polkadot, and Polkadot is just like one piece of technology which I feel is like very much very advanced in terms of what plans they have, and I feel like other ecosystems could learn from them as well. Yeah. So from our end, to your question, like what inspired us to build Stackr? So definitely trying to build more Web2 developers into Web3 is one thing, but we kind of thought that the way applications are built right now is something that has been stuck for like a very long time. We want to change that so that people build more efficient applications. So for now, like the biggest friction point to deploy on the Ethereum virtual machine is learning Solidity and then knowing about how smart contracts work. And then eventually the smart contract is packaged inside a virtual machine, and then that virtual machine is deployed. That virtual machine is the one which executes the smart contract. So we thought that why do that much? Like if you are building, let's say, a token transfer application, why do you need the entire virtual machine? Like you just need to update like a few memory addresses, and that is basically a token transfer. So why not just combine that and like compress it down to that exact logic and deploy
Mm.
it as a rollup itself. So for us, like the micro rollup thesis, so if you are building a token transfer application using the micro rollup framework, you are just building a rollup which can do token transfer. It cannot do anything else. And
Mm-hmm.
this has inspired the word micro rollups because it is similar to microservices, and
Mm-hmm.
how microservices in the web 2 world handle one specific thing, and to do like much more, you just keep adding different microservices and it combines like into a
Mm.
bigger application. So that's our thesis with it. So let's say if you want to build like an exchange, you can have one micro rollup handling the order book, one micro rollup handling the matching engine, and one rollup handling like the token pool itself. These three
Mm.
micro rollups combine together and forms the exchange. This is good because each state is isolated. You don't have to worry about if your order book is like like your order book could be like high frequency, your pool could be something which can be shared across different things.
Mm.
So it gives you a flexibility of doing what
Mm.
you want. So not only you can just use your particular microservice or micro rollup for your use case, but you can open it up to others as well. So if you think your order book engine is like very fast and efficient, someone else wants to use it as well. Not sure what the
Mm.
use case would be, but you can do that ideally. So you host your order book and someone else can tap into it, or you host your liquidity pool,
Mm.
someone else can tap into it, and just like create like this entire ecosystem of things, and everyone just shares some part of it. So in short, like I would like to say that whatever you can do with a smart contract on an L2 or an EVM chain, you can do it better with a smart contract and a combination of a micro rollup. So that's like the way we are putting it out.
Mm. Mm. Maybe another one could be a social graph, or like a social media graph, like all the friends that I have on Twitter. If that was
Yeah.
sort of like open and one of your micro roll-ups, I guess. I hope I'm conceptualizing this right. And then like another application could build on top of the social graph and create another kind of experience.
Exactly. That's literally like one of the use cases. We will be posting a use cases article probably like by the end of this week. And that should like that has like the exact same example that you mentioned. So it's very similar to that. So you can create social graphs. Other people could tap into that social graph and like maybe add value back to it or something. So that's entirely possible here.
Okay, lovely. Well, if that article is on time, by the time this podcast releases, it'll be in the show notes. So for viewers, you can check it out there, likely. um, right. And it is actually also a bit reminiscent of palettes on Polkadot, I think, where you have these sort of like modules, plug and play, the token transfer one, the governance one, and you can just choose them and include them for your chain. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's like one of the like that's the perfect analogy to it as well. So palettes are very similar to micro rollups, and then like you combine palettes to do something, so you have micro rollups to do something else. So that's like the biggest analogy that you can say. Yes.
Okay, okay. Right. So I would assume in terms of what the primary target is for Stackr, or the target users, I assume it would be basically developers and teams that would be interested in deploying rollups, or could it also be um, rollups that are already deployed and would like change to your solution? Or
Yep. So ideally, we definitely want to target developers. So it's like a model where developers use our systems to build things.
yeah.
But also, like to add to it, like they can also use a micro rollup that adds value back to their rollup. So it's not that they
Mm.
have to completely change the way their application are built. They can slowly start offloading some part onto a micro rollup, and then that can like help the rollup back into in some way. So we recently like released an article wherein we mentioned that decentralization is not something which is like an on and off switch. It is a spectrum. So application can go from centralized to decentralized, and it can stay anywhere in between. So for
Mm-hmm.
us, like our offering helps on both ends of the spectrum. So we help applications which are centralized to slowly move their parts to the decentralization spectrum towards the decentralization part. And
Mm-hmm.
an example of that would be like, let's say like the point system right now that we have. So many wallets and like many applications are doing points, which are mostly
Mm-hmm.
centralized in some sense, right?
Yeah.
So what they can do is they can plug in a micro rollup and they can offload the points part onto a micro rollup, and they can just
Mm-hmm.
handle points in a very secure and public kind of way. That okay, this is the action that you did off chain. This is the point that you get, and all the history and like all the transactional records are stored on chain. So this is from getting the centralized part into like the decentralized spectrum. And on the other end, we can also take like a lot of applications which are fully decentralized. Everything is running on chain, but they don't need to run that. So what they can do is
Mm-hmm.
they can slowly put some part away from it, so they can move towards like the centralized spectrum, so that they gain like a lot of efficiency, they gain like a lot of speed, and at the same time they don't lose on any security. So one example could be like maybe like uh, exchanges like which have everything on chain. So maybe they can move their order book in a off chain environment, and that is still secure. So again, like that's like moving the applications between the centralization and decentralization spectrum.
Okay, okay, gotcha. Decentralization. Let's talk about that one because it can be a bit controversial in the market. I mean, in crypto, you often come across window dressing. You know, like the appearance of decentralization without actually being decentralized across like various metrics, if you would look at it. Um, so one of the phrases which I think ties into what you just said that I saw on the website is build sufficiently decentralized apps.
Yeah.
Um, can you just expand on that a little bit more? And how do you kind of like ensure that decentralization does not become an afterthought, like an item far down the roadmap? You know, like we will get to this eventually, you know, I promise. Versus actually an integral part, which is one of the main sort of selling points of Web3, right?
Yep. So I do have like lots of thoughts on that thing. So I myself believe that not everything that is possible to go on chain should go on chain. Like there are
Mm-hmm.
diminishing effects to it. Obviously, you can put entire games on chain. You can have every single action be like a on chain transaction, and every
Mm-hmm.
single state update could be like an on chain transaction. But the point is why? Like if you could just do all of these things in an off chain environment, batch them together, and still be able to prove that okay, this action happened and this is why the state change took place, then you don't need to execute that on the chain. Like there is like more important things to handle on chain, which is like token transfers and like asset management. All of those things makes more sense to do on chain versus
Mm-hmm.
like these small actions. So obviously like high frequency applications, maybe like order books or high frequency games, or just anything which requires like a faster transaction output. First of all, if you do that on chain, you will lose the speed that you want to go towards it. And if you do that completely off chain, you lose the trust, you lose the verifiability. You don't know anything if that actually happened or did not happen, or like the
Mm-hmm.
centralized actor could just like not respect that transaction, or censor it, or could do whatever. So like the best way to do it is having the properties of both. Like the web 2 or like the centralized applications have speed, efficiency, but what they don't have is verifiability. On the other
Mm-hmm.
end, we have amazing verifiability, amazing like security, but you don't have the transaction speed and the transaction throughput that you require. So if you marry both concepts, you get best of both worlds, and still be able to call your application secure, because you do an action off chain and then you verify that action's result
Mm-hmm.
on chain. So that is the sufficiently decentralized term for me particularly.
Mm. Yeah, I think that makes sense conceptually. I think the example you used is also an interesting one. The points, which have been sort of like a meta in the space, you know, like a thing that people post about a lot on X.
Yeah.
So yeah, basically like people using these applications which tend to not have issued their own cryptocurrency, their own token yet, and they collect points for using these applications, and I would say primarily with the hope of an airdrop eventually down the road, which is obviously its own topic in terms of how sustainable that sort of airdrop farming thing is and how healthy for the industry. But um, these points tend to be not tokens on a blockchain, right? They're just
Yeah.
like centralized. I don't know. They're just like points you see on the website of app XYZ. Um, so what do you think about that? You also already mentioned, should points be something that is on chain, or is it fine to have that off chain?
Yeah, so I would argue that they need to be sufficiently decentralized. Like,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, you can keep the point storage off chain, but at the same time, you should have the ability to prove that, okay, you have these number of points off chain and you need to prove that on chain. Otherwise, tomorrow, like the point, like whoever issues the point would just come and say that, hey, you don't really own like 10,000 points, it's just 5,000. Like, I decide to do
Mm.
that. But at the same time, if they have the credibility to prove that on chain, they cannot like change that. Like once you prove that, okay, I have 10,000 points off chain, I have 10,000 points off chain. And if you really extend it to airdrops, you can just directly do an airdrop, like whatever points that you have off chain, or like maybe like a micro roll up in this case, then that can directly translate it to an airdrop. So you can technically do an airdrop as a micro roll up as well. So all the
Mm.
tokens that you are eligible for gets collected inside a micro roll-up, which looks nothing different than points itself. And then
Mm.
once the actual token releases, you can just exit from the micro roll-up. You can take all the points, you can burn the points and claim tokens on the other end. There are like a lot of like interesting user experiences built over here as well. Like once people get like an airdrop, the first instinct for them is to just sell. So what you can
Mm.
do is you can create a mechanism wherein like if an airdrop occurred on a micro rollup, they have like a lock-in period that, okay, for 7 days or like 14 days or whatever amount of time, you cannot exit
Mm.
that micro rollup. You hold that token until it stabilizes or until it's there. Obviously, like this is something which not a lot of people would want to do, but this is like a use case for more serious applications which actually want people to hold their token and use their token in a way. So that's like one use case that would be really interesting, like points to airdrops and directly on chain. So that connection direct.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Is that something you have talked about to projects interested in deploying micro rollups to you guys, or?
Yeah, so we have been talking about it like a few partners. So we are definitely building something around it as well. So yeah, hopefully we'll be talking about it on in public soon.
Okay, lovely, lovely. And just in terms of in general, how has um, how has the journey been? Have you Are you seeing interest from projects for this topic? What kind of what are you seeing thus far?
Yeah, definitely. So the progress has been really interesting, like how the space came from. I think it was last year when the app roll-up narrative started growing, and then it kind of like plateaued, and then went up again. Now people are talking about like more infrastructure stuff. So it has been really interesting. We have been talking to a lot of people on what use cases they can think of, what things that they can build. One thing that I feel we are. We see interesting is that not a lot of people like get this particular architecture. Like for them,
Mhm.
rollups means something that has a VM, then you can deploy a smart contract on, and that's basically it. And like there have been like a lot of confusing narrative also, like, okay, what kind of VM that we are using, what kind of execution environment that we provide, and like how to deploy contracts on them and something around that. So it is interesting to tell these people that, okay, this is not something like in a traditional sense of a rollup. You build your
Mm.
application like a web2 backend, and then that web2 backend is able to prove whatever happened on that backend on chain. So this is something which a lot of people like it. We have been talking to like a few of them. There are interesting use cases coming up on that front, and like a lot of different kinds of applications being built which are technically not possible to be built on like traditional rollups.
Mm. Okay, that's exciting to hear. Perhaps just what has your journey actually been? Because I said it in the intro as well. You did some work at the Ethereum Foundation, I think. Yeah, tell me a bit more about that and how you ended up with founding Stackr.
Yeah, of course. So at the Ethereum Foundation, I was actually working on a very similar project. It was called the Hubble Optimistic Rollup, which was technically the first application specific rollup. And that did like only token transfer. So you push from L1 to Hubble and you create an account there. And that L2 is hyper optimized for token transfers. And
Mm.
that's all what it can do. It can only do transfers. And the way it worked was very unique. and the efficiency was so nice that it was about 20 to 40 times cheaper than to transact on Hubble as compared to like the leading state of the art rollup that was being built at
Okay.
that time. So that inspired me to like think about more use cases. Okay, like if we can do it for token transfers, can it be done with NFT drops? Can it be done with other use cases? Can it do games? Can it do order books and all those things? And that is when like I thought about, okay, maybe we can start like a project which can do all of these things. During that time, like ETH Global like did their first online hackathon. I think it was the first or the second iteration of it, and I participated just to test this thesis out. And I dropped like the first iteration of Stackr as a hackathon project. A lot of people liked it. Like it kind of like got covered in a lot of like major podcasts and outlets as well. And that is when I realized that okay, this has potential. And that is when I started to more formally start working on it. Started doing like a fundraise round, and then eventually ended up like completing the round. Then I was also invited at A16Z's CSS event, like the previous iteration of it. So I went to LA for that. That was amazing. And
Lovely.
right after that, like I started growing the project. The team grew a little bit. We started doing like a lot of proof of concepts. One of the most interesting one was just build like a r/place clone, where you select a pixel on a board and that pixel becomes your pixel, and it creates like an entire image. So everyone selects pixels around it. So that
Okay.
is one experiment that we did. And yeah, this quarter we are planning to release like a beta testnet. Last year in December we released a very small I would say like a small release to a small
Hmm.
group of people who were invited to try the SDK out and give us feedback in our hacker house. And eventually they also participated in the ETH India hackathon. And it was interesting to see that out of the 12 participants, four of them actually built micro-rollups and they won prizes
Oh,
on the hackathon itself. So that was like one of the
nice.
major milestones that we had. Yeah.
Cool. Cool. It's nice to see these early successes without having like a mainnet online or anything like that, right?
Yeah, that was definitely very, very interesting. We plan to like give it out to more people, so people should be like on a lookout for like a beta phase drop. So hopefully by the end of this month, we'll be starting out with a beta release.
Okay, sweet, sweet. Nice. Dropping some alpha here. That's always good. Right. I was thinking maybe what could be useful to viewers as well, because in terms of this whole rollup framework, rollup as a service kind of narrative, and all these projects coming up. So you kind of can wrap your head around it a little bit better. What is what? How do these things? Um, how are these things connected? How could they accrue value if they want to think about maybe investing in a token or whatever? So obviously, like I said, there is a lot of focus more recently on like modularity of chains and rollups and simplifying deployment of rollups. Which is interesting to see again because I've been a bit more involved in Polkadot over the years. That was like a conviction that was early on embraced there, and I feel like the market has kind of like caught up to it now, and now it's a thing overall. Um, there's new projects, like Avail, whose co-founder we had on recently. There's Dimension, Altlayer, Caldera. All these new names come to mind. And I saw you had an interesting article published in your blog, I guess, which was sort of like where you kind of defined these different types of projects or applications. So you said kind of like there's rollups, there's rollup frameworks, there's rollups as a service. So can you give us an overview of this again? Kind of explain like what are the different segments here, the different projects, and how does Stackr fit into it again? Just so we
Yeah.
kind of like understand. Yeah.
Yep. So as I mentioned, like early on, what rollups are like? Rollups are just elevated execution environments which take away
Mm.
load from the parent chain to an off-chain environment, and then they submit like an aggregate proof of that back on chain, so it's provable that the execution actually happened correctly. Rollup frameworks are just the way of doing it. So how the rollup is structured, what language does it use, what state machine does it use, what kind of transaction pattern is there, what kind of gas market is there, and all of those things. So all of these things combine into a rollup framework. So every application, every provider of a rollup framework does it like slightly differently. Some of them use EVM directly as the execution environment, so that's one. And then they add like a small flavor on top of it on how you can modify that execution environment. So I think an example of that would be OP Stack, maybe Polygon CDK. Then there are other alt VMs which use like a different virtual machine on top of EVM. So I think Move VM has been coming up, like that has been gaining traction as well. So Movement Labs have been working on it really well. Another example was Solana execution environment as a L2 on top of EVM. So Eclipse is working in that direction. So that's like, these are like all rollup frameworks on how they are uplifting the execution and delegating it to an off-chain environment. And the way it is structured is the framework. So for us, we are taking the approach of like the micro-rollup framework, wherein the user is supposed to write their own state transition function and then interact with it. So for us, it's like the micro-rollup is the framework for it. Then comes in like rollup as a service providers. So these rollup as a service providers, or RAS for short, take in these execution environments and then they provide a copy of it for you to modify. So let's say Altlayer or maybe Caldera, they you go onto their platform and then you click deploy, and then they provide you a fresh copy of one of these frameworks. So these frameworks are something which are used by the rollup as a service provider to give you a copy of it so you can modify it and you can deploy it. So it makes development easier. So they are more of a hosting platform, although like the projects are adding more features into it so that you don't need to go anywhere else. So if you want to modify the data availability there, you can do that. If you want to modify the sequencing, you can opt into a shared sequencer. So Rollup as a service provider just package these frameworks into a very nice offering so that you have multiple different things going on over there. And yeah, that's pretty much like the difference between a framework and a rollup as a service provider. For us, Stackr is trying to provide like a framework first, and then based on like how the framework is used and modified and like hosted, we'll probably move into more of a rollup as a service space. That okay, now you built your rollup, like you built your micro rollup, and how do you deploy it? So that's when the RAS part kicks in.
Okay. That's a lovely overview. And in terms of, like you said, you will perhaps move also into the adjacent rollup as a service segment. Would you have the focus then on your framework, as in to say which micro rollups to use and things like that, or would you be agnostic sort of from frameworks again, and people could choose other frameworks like OP and stuff as well, or like?
Yeah, so for us right now, the entire focus is on building the framework, and the RAS part comes in later. But it would be like targeted towards our framework specifically. That okay, you build something using Stackr, and now how do you add more services to it? Also, like just to add to it, it might be a little tangential. So the way we are building a framework is completely in the direction of keeping modularity first. So I kind of like divide the entire blockchain generation into three phases. One was like the Bitcoin era, where you did not like it was focused on just transfer of assets. So that was the Gen 1 blockchain. Then Gen 2 blockchains came up, which also added like an execution engine on top of it. So Ethereum would be an example. And now right now we are in a phase of Gen 3 blockchains, which are modular blockchains by like design. So for us, we are keeping modularity at like the topmost level. So you can use the Stackr framework to build a micro rollup, and you can use any suite of services around it. So if you want to plug in like a custom shared sequencer, you can do whatever you want. You can plug in like a third-party provider. If you want to plug in like a different DA layer, you can do that. And everything is by design. You don't have to like do like lots of effort to do that. So we decided to go like first with Avail. So Avail has already integrated. The people who built during ETH India hackathon built on Avail by default, but we will also be adding like more services on the DA end. So it would be just like Legos, that okay, I pick like a base piece, then I add a layer on top, I'll add a layer in between, and I'll add a layer on the bottom. But overall, it will be packaged like as a micro rollup, which can utilize these third-party services and create your application.
Okay, so within micro rollups, they might be using external offers, external chains for data availability, for example, Avail. Yeah.
Yep,
Mm.
exactly.
Okay, and how in terms of these roll-up frameworks, right? That we talked about now, that all these different ones that might you be using the EVM, like you said, and um, how do they accrue value? Because these things tend to be open source, right? And then you can use it and develop your own roll-up with it. For example, you could obviously provide some tooling and some easier deployment experiences on top to add some value. But still, like, how do you actually monetize this sort of, and how do you accrue value to Stackr, who is then one a player providing a rollup framework?
Yeah, no, that's like one of the most difficult questions to ask at this point. So I think in most sense, like you mentioned, like most of these execution frameworks are open source and anyone can just like use it in the way they can.
Yeah.
But I think the value accrual comes from like the ecosystem that it provides. So for us, we are offering the entire SDK as a package wherein you get the execution environment and then you get the verification layer, and obviously you can choose whatever parent chain that you have. So the execution environment and the verification layer itself comprises of like the entire SDK or the entire framework that works together to build the ecosystem. So for us, we have been giving like a lot of thoughts on how the network economics would look like. So obviously there is some network economics involved in the verifier space, in the execution space. So we are thinking of it in terms like of a hybrid model wherein the application and the user interacts in a different way and the application and the network interacts in a different way. So this is like a combination of web 2 and web 3. So how the web 2 works is through APIs, like they monetize it through API calls and all of those things. So the application accrues value on that. But at the bottom layer, where we have the verifier layer and the interoperability between the different rollups, so we are thinking of like doing something there as well, so that becomes like a hybrid economy wherein web 2 way of doing things and web 3 way of doing things combined together. So that is probably the maximum that I can talk about right now.
Okay, okay, I understand. So is one approach okay? Let's see if you can talk about it or not. But is one approach, because it's one approach I think that you see in these other frameworks where they sort of go, okay, they try to create like an ecosystem of rollups deployed through that framework, and then like have some sort of interoperability baked in to kind of add value that way. Be like, okay, if you deploy through us, there'll be like some interoperability and some additional value that can be accrued to them. Is that something then that you think about?
Yeah, no, definitely. That's one way of doing things. Like obviously you can have sort of like a commission based system or like a white labor based system that okay, if you are using this like using a service which we provide you, you pay us like a small fees out of it. So I think this is like a similar model to how Superchain does it, like in the optimism stack, that okay, they have like a shared sequencer, shared revenue model. So shared revenue model is definitely like one of the topmost thing which other rollups do as well, that okay, hey, you used our SDK to build your rollup. Now like whatever profits that you are generating, you share like a part of that revenue with us. So that is definitely one of the models that we can go for. Also we see that happening a lot in the current design space. So definitely like that's something which we are also thinking as well or may implement, like, but again, like that's like too early to talk about at this point.
Okay, okay. And are you specifically trying to get Web2 devs onboarded? Because I suppose on the one hand, it's a bigger market, bigger addressable market because you have more developers outside of crypto. But on the other hand, it's sort of like harder, I guess, to reach those and convince those to come to develop on crypto versus getting crypto native devs to look at your solution.
Yeah,
How is it going on that front?
yeah. So we don't have like a particular thing in mind that okay, we are exclusively going for web 2 developers or exclusively going to web 3 developers. To your point, obviously it's difficult to convince people to like jump the ship and like go from one end or something like that. So going towards the Web3 side of things makes sense because they already know these things, they are already familiar with it. But again, as I mentioned, the thing that we are doing is something different, so they also get like a hard time understanding, okay, this is how things can be structured as well. So we don't want to target like one specific area. We want to build it in between that. Okay, our objective is to move applications on the decentralization spectrum. So that is something that we want to do, that okay, if you are centralized, how about you decentralize some part of your application so that it becomes more verifiable and more secure for your users. On the other end, if there is a completely decentralized application, we go to them and we tell them that, hey, if you move this slightly off chain, you become sufficiently decentralized, you won't lose on any security, but at the same time, this is the amount of performance gain that you will get. So that is like the approach that we are taking instead of targeting like a particular group.
Okay. And the off-chain thing that you just mentioned, does Stackr cover that off-chain thing then? So far, I might have been wrong then. How I understood this, I thought all these things are sort of, those micro-rollups are kind of like on-chain, but is that not correct then?
Oh no, so it's partially correct. Like the execution happens off chain, so we give an environment where you can. So let me put it this way. So with Stackr frameworks, you build a Web3 backend, if it makes sense. So you build an application which is similar to a Web2 application. It is a backend. It has its own database. It has its own engine to execute something. You send transactions to it, and that happens completely off chain. In fact, we even go to a certain extent that you deploy your own thing. You own that infrastructure, and you can run it in any cloud provider in a centralized way. What happens next is the framework kicks in. There is a micro rollup module inside that backend which collects all the transactions that you are getting on that rollup, and then it batches them together and sends it to our verification layer. So the verification layer is something that we are running in a decentralized way. Right now we are starting out with a single node that we'll run, but eventually we'll progressively decentralize it to add more people into it, and that would be like a different network economy altogether. But what happens is all the transactions that were collected on the centralized backend gets batched together and sent to the verification layer. Then the verification layer, right now it's pessimistic, so it verifies that okay, the transaction ran correctly or not, and then it creates a block and then posts that block on chain. So this is like the entire end-to-end transaction flow. So obviously the execution engine is running off chain, but the transactions are verified and like then only gets posted on chain. So like the entire security is maintained and shared.
With on-chain, you mean the parent chain then?
Yes,
Or?
yes, the parent chain.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Actually, you guys, I believe, closed a seed raise recently. So congrats on that, first of
Thank you
all.
so much.
Yeah, just tell me a bit about that. How did that go?
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. So I'm a first time founder and I haven't like looked into like the entrepreneurship space a lot, but thankfully I had like a lot of friends along the way who helped me navigate this. So I think the narrative that we were building was pretty like hot, and like people were actually realizing the potential of application specific rollups during the time the project got kicked off, and like by the time the round got closed. So it was very interesting to talk about like all the VCs, reaching out to them, explaining the current infrastructure and the architecture that we are building, going over back and forth on like the potential problems and like potential fixes that we have. But eventually they converged and they were like, okay, yeah, this is nice and this is worth looking at and worth building. So that is how like it ended up. So it was pretty good. So also like right after that, as I mentioned, I went to the CSS program wherein they got in like all the new entrepreneurs and like taught them how things work. So that was a really good experience for me as well, where I actually learned, okay, this is how things work. I was always there on like the other side of things where I was building for someone else, and like this time I was on this side of the table. So it was pretty new but exciting, and like I had like a lot of learning experiences there.
That's awesome. That sounds like you're really going through a dynamic change right now. So that can be quite exciting. Also, I saw some interesting names in terms of your angel investors. You know, you got like the founder of Eigenlayer, co-founder of Polygon, and Avail. I think co-founder of Celestia. How did that come about? Perhaps also interesting for aspiring entrepreneurs, let's say. How did you get that visibility to get the conviction and participation in your fundraise from such like known figures in the market?
Yeah, so the beauty of this space is like everyone who whatever level of project that they are building are very open to like helping out and like talking to people and like just giving suggestions. So I was initially very skeptical that okay, if like this person is like a very like founder of a very big project, so what will happen if I just like DM them? But apparently like the space is so nice that if you DM anyone, most of them would come back to you, they will reply to you, they will explain things very nicely. And that is how I probably went about it as well. So I reached out to a couple of folks that I shared them what ideas that I'm working on. They were like interested on it, they had discussion, we had a couple of calls, and then they were like, okay, yeah, this is something nice that you're building, continue this, but at the same time, okay, this is something which you'll face problems with, or do it in this particular way. And they provided some feedback around it. So yeah, I would say like Sreeram and like Anurag have been like really helpful, Mustafa as well. So almost all the angels that we have are really really great people, like just very down to earth, helping out, like very helpful on every aspect of things. So really grateful to them to be supporting the project as well. So like for the like the newer entrepreneurs, I would just say like, okay, don't worry about like, okay, if you will get a reply or not, just try it, and there is a very high probability that people will help out.
That's awesome. So you kind of like cold DM'd some of these people as well.
Yeah, I did reach out to them. There were some connections as well, but yeah, great people to support us.
That's lovely. That's good advice. Just send the DM. Cool. Yeah, sweet. I mean, that was a lovely overview, I think, for me personally, to wrap my head around the whole roll up environment. Yeah, just want to ask you sort of what's next for you guys right now, what's coming up. Also, where would you like to point viewers, perhaps, if they would like to learn more or get more involved or things like that?
Yep. So we are going to release a beta phase. We are going to announce a beta phase for developers by the end of this month, which is March, and we will be onboarding like a selected group of developers to start building on it. We will also start with a call for. We'll also start with a request for experiments program, which is similar to a grants program, and we'll expect people to like reach out to us and talk to us about their use cases and what they want to build with it. The most useful resource would be our website and like the blog page, which is mirror.xyz/stackerlabs.eth. And also, if they want to do like a conversation with us, Discord is the best place. Just come to our Discord, open a ticket, and like we are just very excited to talk to people, whoever reaches out, and like we want to build some interesting use cases. So yeah, look out for the beta release and like reach out to us via Twitter or by Discord.
That's awesome. Cool. Sweet. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been awesome. And yeah, all the best for the upcoming milestones. And we'll be happy to chat to you guys in the future again.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on the show. Like really great talking to you. And yeah, hopefully I like come again and talk to you about more interesting things that are going on for sure.
For sure. Thank you.
All right.